When I first realized that the people I loved most might one day leave me behind, I refused to believe it. I thought promises were unbreakable. I thought loyalty lasted a lifetime. I thought love was enough, but I was wrong. It happened slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. Small gestures that should have comforted me became distant, and moments of warmth became rare. Yet I stayed, hoping, waiting, believing. My name is Nasreen. I am 72 years old, and this is the story of how I devoted my life to my family only to be forgotten when I needed them most. I was born in a small town, where streets smelled of spices, and children played barefoot on dusty roads. My mother always said, "Care for others, Nasreen, and the world will care for you." I carried that lesson with me throughout my life. I married Imran when I was 23. He was kind, hardworking, and gentle. We had 3 children, Ahmed, Shazia, and little Farah. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Every day was simple. Every day was filled with small joys: a shared cup of tea, laughter over burnt roti, stories whispered at bedtime. From the beginning, I poured my life into my family. I cooked, cleaned, sewed, listened, and loved without pause. I stayed awake nights when the children were sick. I walked miles to the market for a missing ingredient, and I saved every extra rupee for their education. I never complained. I never demanded recognition. I believed love itself was its own reward. Years passed. My children grew, studied, married, and had children of their own. I became the grandmother, the anchor, the steady presence in the house. I watched over my grandchildren with gentle hands and a careful heart, just as I had done with my children. For decades, my life was devotion. I found joy in their smiles, pride in their accomplishments, and comfort in their presence. I thought my efforts had built a family that would never forget me, but life has a cruel way of reminding you that love alone cannot shield you from abandonment. It started with small changes, subtle shifts that I tried to ignore. Ahmed, my eldest, began spending less time at home, not because of work alone, but because he preferred the company of friends, social events, or long weekends away. Shazia, my daughter, became distant, always preoccupied with her own career. Even Farah, the youngest, started avoiding long conversations, always busy with her phone or friends. At first, I told myself it was normal. Everyone needs their space. I reminded myself that they were adults, capable of making decisions. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was slowly becoming invisible. I remember one afternoon clearly. The house was quiet. I had baked my grandchildren's favorite sweet, jalebi, hoping to surprise them. I called out their names, expecting laughter, excitement, the rush of tiny feet. But no one came. They were all occupied. Ahmed was on a call, Shazia scrolling on her phone, and Farah glued to her laptop. I placed the jalebi on the table and sat quietly in the living room. I felt a deep ache in my chest, the first real pang of being left out. I told myself, it's okay. They are busy. They love me. But deep down, I felt a seed of fear sprouting, a fear that one day, they might not need me at all. And that day came sooner than I expected. It was a warm morning, sunlight spilling into the kitchen. I had prepared breakfast for everyone, humming softly, carrying my heart in each dish I set on the table. I looked forward to sharing the meal, to watching their smiles. Ahmed came first, distracted, barely looking up. Shazia followed, tired from her night shift, murmuring a quick greeting. Farah arrived last, yawning, eyes fixed on her phone. I said softly, "Good morning, everyone. I made your favorite paratha." They nodded, but the energy wasn't there. They sat, ate mechanically, and spoke little. I tried to make conversation. I asked Ahmed about his work, Shazia about her new project, Farah about her school. The answers were curt, polite, but brief. And then Farah, the little girl I had raised with so much love, looked at me and said, "Amma, you don't have to make breakfast anymore. We can manage on our own." It was not just a sentence. It was a verdict. I smiled weakly, my hands trembling slightly as I poured tea. "That's very thoughtful, Beta," I said. But inside, something crumbled. The thought that I had been sidelined in my own home pierced through me like a cold wind. I didn't cry. I didn't scold. I only nodded, setting the table quietly. Later, I realized that my family had been preparing for this moment for a long time. Little by little, they had carved space for themselves, while leaving me in the margins. The signs were all there: missed calls, uninvited gatherings, polite but distant tones, doors closed gently. and suggestions that I rest or not worry about certain things. I stayed quiet, because what else could I do? How could I argue with those I loved? That evening, as I sat alone, I began to write. I wrote my memories, my love, my sacrifices. I wrote the stories my children might forget. I wrote the lessons I had learned and the joys I had experienced. Writing became my refuge, a way to hold on to myself when the world around me seemed to drift away. But deep down, I knew that my refuge was fragile, and so began the next chapter of my life, the chapter where I would face the harsh truth. The people who once promised to care for me, who once relied on my presence and my love, were slowly letting me go. I did not leave immediately. I stayed, hoping, watching, waiting. I believed that time could heal the growing distance. That love could rebuild the walls that had begun to crumble. But as months passed, it became clear that this hope was a fragile illusion. One morning, I overheard Ahmed talking on the phone. He said something that will remain in my mind forever. "Mom, she's too old. We need to make arrangements. She should live somewhere else, at least for a while. It's better for everyone." I felt the floor beneath me shift. The people I loved, my children, were talking about moving me away as if I were a guest, as if I were an object in their house rather than its heart. I retreated to my room. I sat on the bed, hands folded, tears silently streaming. I thought about Rahim, my late husband, who had always promised me we would grow old together, surrounded by our children and grandchildren. Now, alone in the silence of my room, I realized that life had changed. My role, my purpose, the place I thought I belonged in, was no longer assured. But even in that moment of despair, I remembered the lessons of my youth. I remembered my mother's words, "Care for others, and the world will care for you." Perhaps the world had not lived up to her promise, but I could still care. I could still hold on to my dignity, my grace, my memories, and so I began to prepare, not for anger, not for revenge, but for survival, for self-respect, for the quiet strength I would need to carry myself through the days ahead, because life has a way of testing us. Not when we are young, but when we are old. It tests our patience, our love, and our resilience, and I was about to face the most difficult test of all. The first few weeks after that realization were the hardest. I walked through my own home feeling like a stranger. The walls, once echoing with laughter, now seemed to watch me silently. The rooms that held decades of memories, my children learning to walk, my grandchildren taking their first steps, birthdays, festivals, late-night chats felt alien. Every familiar corner carried a faint pang of loss. I tried to hold on to normalcy. I continued my routines, waking early to make tea, preparing small snacks, tidying up the living room, and tending to the garden. But the house had changed. The atmosphere had shifted. Even the air felt heavier, burdened with unspoken words. At first, it was subtle. A sigh here, a curt reply there. Ahmed, once full of warmth and laughter, now spoke to me politely, with a distance I could not bridge. Shazia seemed constantly busy with her career, no longer pausing to ask about my health or my day. Farah avoided long conversations, always with a phone in her hand, her gaze distant. I began noticing small things, gestures that had once been second nature now required approval. One evening, I had baked Savian, my grandchildren's favorite. The aroma filled the kitchen, carrying memories of festivals and joyous family gatherings. I called them to the kitchen, expecting excitement, eager chatter, smiles. Instead, Farah looked up, glanced at the dish, and said softly, "Amma, you don't have to make this. We can manage." The words were polite, but they struck me like cold wind. I forced a small smile. "It's okay, Beta. I thought you would like it." But her expression didn't change. She turned back to her book, indifferent. Later, I tried to speak to Ahmed about a minor household repair. I suggested fixing the leaking tap before it became worse. He paused, then said, "Don't worry, Amma. I'll see to it later." Later never came. It was not just about tasks or routines. It was the gradual erosion of connection, the subtle removal of my place in the home. My presence had been reduced to being polite, quiet, helpful only when called upon. I remember sitting one evening in the garden, my hands folded over my lap, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The colors were breathtaking, golden and fiery, yet I felt a chill inside. I realized that my children had slowly started to make decisions without consulting me, planning their lives without including me. Even Aisha, my youngest grandchild, who used to run into my arms every morning, begin spending more time with her parents, leaving me behind. The real heartbreak came gradually. In small acts that collectively shattered my sense of belonging, Ahmed began making plans for weekend outings without me, assuming I preferred to stay home. Shazia would invite her friends for lunch and forget to mention it to me, as if I were invisible. Farah started dismissing my advice, sometimes even rolling her eyes when I spoke. I tried to confront them gently, not with anger, but with questions. Did I do something wrong? Have I offended anyone? But the answers were always evasive. You're fine, Amma. Don't worry, they would say. But the words felt hollow. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between Ahmed and Shazia. They were discussing holiday plans without including me. She'll be fine staying with her sister. She'll love the company, Ahmed said. I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding. Yes, it's better for everyone. She needs to rest, Shazia replied. Rest. That word again. It was the polite way of saying, you are no longer needed here. I retreated to my room, tears silently flowing down my cheeks. I felt as though I had been erased from the lives I had devoted myself to. The very people who once leaned on me, trusted me, and needed me, had quietly decided I was no longer essential. I began to shrink inside. I stopped volunteering to help. I stopped offering advice. I stopped preparing small meals or arranging family gatherings. Every attempt to connect seemed to widen the gap between us. One day, I tried to join Ahmed for lunch. He politely suggested I stay in my room, saying he had something urgent to finish. I obeyed silently, though my heart ached. Shazia, too, started restricting my interactions with the grandchildren. Aisha was scolded for spending too much time with me, even though all she wanted was a story or a hug. I noticed that I was becoming invisible, reduced to a background presence, tolerated but not needed. Every gesture of mine, every small act of love, was either ignored or gently discouraged. The breaking point came quietly, as it often does, one morning. I walked into the living room with a plate of freshly baked biscuits for Aisha. The aroma made me smile. I remembered her delighted face from years past. Before I could even offer the plate, Shazia said sharply, Amma, don't give her too many sweets. She needs to follow her diet. Aisha looked at me, conflicted, as if torn between love for her grandmother and obedience to her mother. She whispered softly, Amma, maybe later. I nodded silently, placing the biscuits back on the counter. My hands trembled. My heart felt heavy, yet I said nothing. I did not want to be a burden. These repeated incidents created a growing storm inside me. A storm of grief, confusion, and quiet anger. I found myself withdrawing, not out of choice, but because I had no space left. I began spending hours in my room, looking through old photographs. Pictures of childhood, birthdays, and school days, memories of laughter, love, and togetherness. Each image brought tears, not just for nostalgia, but for the growing absence in my present. The grandchildren, who once clung to me, now approached hesitantly. As though unsure of how to engage with someone no longer central to their lives, I realized then that my family's promises had quietly eroded. Promises to care, to include, to cherish the very foundations of my life had crumbled without a single confrontation, without a single loud argument. One rainy afternoon, I was sitting by the window, watching the droplets race down the glass. My thoughts wandered back to moments of care I had given over decades, staying up all night when a child was sick, sewing school uniforms, preparing meals, comforting heartbreaks. And yet, here I was, alone in the house. My presence no longer acknowledged. It was Ahmed who finally spoke the words that confirmed my fears. Amma, he said gently one evening, maybe it's better if you spend some time at your sister's place. She lives nearby, and you'll have company there. We can manage things here. I felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath me. I understand, I whispered, but my voice shook. He placed a hand on mine. We love you, Amma. We just think this is better for everyone. Better for everyone, not for me. I nodded silently. That night, I packed a small bag with essentials, photographs, a few cherished trinkets, and letters. I wanted to leave quietly, preserving my dignity. The morning I was to leave, Aisha, my youngest, ran to me with tears in her eyes. Amma, don't go, she pleaded. I held her in my arms, stroking her hair. I will be back, Beta. I promise. But deep down, I knew things would never be the same. The family I had devoted my life to had quietly chosen a life without me at its center that day. As I walked to the car with my suitcase, I felt the weight of decades pressing down on me, the love I had given, the care I had provided, the loyalty I had shown. And yet, I was leaving gently, quietly, almost invisibly. It was the moment I realized that love and devotion, no matter how genuine, cannot always prevent the inevitable. Sometimes even those closest to you will forget, move on, and leave you behind. And so began a new chapter in my life, one where I had to learn to live again, not for my family, but for myself. After weeks of quiet tension, the day everything changed arrived like a storm I had long sensed but could not prepare for. I woke that morning with a dull ache in my chest. It wasn't physical. It was the weight of anticipation, the heaviness of knowing that my place in the family was no longer secure. The house felt different. The walls, once familiar and comforting, seemed to close in on me. Even the smell of freshly brewed tea felt distant, almost foreign. Ahmed was already in the living room, reading the newspaper. Shazia was scrolling through her phone on the sofa. Aisha was playing quietly with her toys, avoiding eye contact. The silence in the house was louder than any argument, louder than any shouted fight. It screamed at me that things had shifted irreversibly. I decided to sit near the window, as I had often done in the mornings, hoping the soft sunlight would soothe my restless heart. But even the sunlight seemed muted, filtered through clouds heavy with rain. The first sign that morning that this day would be different came when Shazia spoke. Casually, almost offhandedly. "Amma, we were thinking it might be better if you spend some time at your sister's place. She lives nearby and can keep you company." I froze mid-sip of tea. "Spend some time?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she said, her tone calm and polite. "It will give us space. And you'll have someone to talk to during the day." I stared at her, searching for any hint of warmth or reassurance. There was none. Her eyes were firm, unwavering. I wanted to ask if this was permanent. I wanted to ask why the home I had devoted myself to had become a place where I was no longer needed. But my voice caught in my throat. Ahmed looked up from his newspaper and added gently, "We love you, Amma. We just think this is better for everyone. Better for everyone. Not for me." I felt the walls of the room close in. I wanted to protest, to demand that my home, my life was not theirs to rearrange. But deep down, I knew there was no fight left in me. My heart was tired, my spirit exhausted. I nodded slowly, forcing a calm smile. "I understand," I whispered. Shazia placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. A gesture meant to soothe, but it felt like a gentle push away. "Thank you, Amma," she said softly. "We just want what's best for you and the children." I didn't argue. I couldn't. That morning, I began the quiet, painstaking task of packing my belongings. Each item I folded into my small suitcase carried decades of memories, old photographs, letters from Ahmed and Aisha, shawls I had worn at family gatherings, trinkets from holidays, small crafts made by my grandchildren. Every fold, every careful placement, felt like a farewell to a chapter of my life I had not wanted to close. Aisha wandered into my room halfway through my packing. Her tiny hands clutched a stuffed rabbit. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Amma, don't go," she whispered, her voice trembling. I knelt down and pulled her into my arms. I held her tight, memorizing the warmth of her small body, the scent of her hair, the softness of her hands. "I have to go, Beta," I said softly. "But I will come back. I promise." She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, stay with me. Don't leave." I felt my own tears spill, hot and unrestrained. I stroked her hair, whispering over and over, "I love you, I love you." But the house was quiet around us. The silence weighed heavily, pressing down on us both. Ahmed entered the room, his face a mixture of guilt and helplessness. He looked at Aisha and then at me. "I'll come visit every day," he said gently. "You'll be fine with your sister." I nodded again, too exhausted to argue. My heart ached with the knowledge that my home, the place I had nurtured and cared for all my life, had become a place where I no longer belonged. The car ride to my sister's house was silent. Aisha clung to my hand, sobbing quietly. I held her, trying to comfort her, while my own tears fell freely. Ahmed and Shazia exchanged brief glances, but said nothing. Giving us this small, painful moment together. As we drove away, I looked back at the house, the windows where I had watched my children grow, the doors I had opened countless times for loved ones, the garden I had tended for decades. Everything I had built, everything I had nurtured, seemed to shrink into the distance. By the time we reached my sister's home, Aisha had fallen asleep in my lap. I carried her inside, placing her gently on the couch. My sister greeted me warmly, but I could see the unease in her eyes. She had her own life, her own family, yet here I was, a shadow of the past, intruding into her world. I unpacked my suitcase quietly, setting each item down carefully. The room felt strange, unfamiliar, even though it was filled with memories from my own childhood. I sat by the window, staring at the familiar sights outside, but my heart remained elsewhere, back at the house I had been pushed out of. Back at the family I had loved with every ounce of my being. Days passed slowly. My children called occasionally, but the conversations were brief, polite. They asked about my health, made sure I was eating, and then returned to their routines. The warmth, the intimacy, the connection I had once shared with them had vanished. I realized then that I had been pushed out, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with careful politeness. The kind of politeness that erases presence, that slowly removes a person from the life they built, leaving only faint echoes behind. I spent my mornings walking in the garden, reading old letters, and looking through photographs. Each day was filled with quiet reflection, a meditation on the love I had given and the absence I now faced. Even Ayesha's visits became less frequent. Her parents began to structure her time differently, keeping her busy with school, activities, and friends. I was no longer the center of her world. I had become a chapter she occasionally glanced back at, a memory of warmth she once knew. It was during these long, quiet days that I began to understand a painful truth. Love and devotion do not always guarantee presence. Sometimes even the people closest to you, those you have nurtured, sacrificed for, and cherished, will move forward without you. And yet, in that understanding, I also began to discover a new strength. I realized that while I had been defined by my roles as a mother, grandmother, and caregiver, I was still my own person. I had dreams, memories, and a life beyond the home I had been pushed out of. I started to write again, filling pages with memories, stories, and reflections. I painted small canvases, tended to my sister's garden, and reconnected with old friends. Slowly, I began to reclaim my identity, not as someone's mother or grandmother, but as Salma, a woman with a life of her own. The turning point was painful, yes, but it also became a moment of awakening. I understood that while my family had chosen to exclude me, I could still create meaning, joy, and purpose in my own life. And so, I made a silent vow. I would continue to love, but I would also continue to live for myself, for my happiness, and for the memories that had shaped me. The first few days at my sister's home were the hardest. Every corner of the room I stayed in reminded me of what I had lost. The familiar hum of my own kitchen, the soft creak of the stairs in my house, the warm sunlight on my living room sofa, all of it was gone. My sister, Anissa, tried to make me comfortable. She cooked my favorite meals, offered me the best pillow, and asked repeatedly if I needed anything. But despite her warmth, her home was not mine. The air felt different, like I was a guest in a place where I had not built memories, where my heart had no roots. I spent the first night staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, feeling the weight of solitude pressing against me. I wanted to cry, to call out for Ahmed, for Aisha, for the life I had known, but I didn't. I just lay there, silent, letting the tears come in slow, quiet waves. The days stretched on. Aisha visited once a week. Each time, she ran to me with the same open arms, her little voice filled with joy. But each visit reminded me of what I was missing. I would watch her laugh and play, knowing that I could no longer be part of her daily life. Her parents limited our time together, insisting that she needed routines, structure, and focus. I understood, logically, but my heart ached with the loss of closeness I had once cherished. I began to notice small things about myself that had gone unnoticed when I was constantly giving. I slept later, not because I needed to, but because I could. I ate slowly, savoring each bite. I started reading books I had left on the shelf for years. I began writing letters to Rahim, pouring my heart out onto pages that no one else would see. In these quiet moments, I began to reclaim pieces of myself I had lost along the way. Yet even as I found these small joys, the ache of absence remained. Some nights, I would sit by the window, watching the rain fall gently against the glass, and I would imagine the life I had left behind. I imagined Ahmed walking down the hallway, Aisha calling for me from the living room, and Shazia asking for my advice on small household matters. My mind replayed countless moments: birthday celebrations, school projects, bedtime stories, and warm conversations in the kitchen. It was during one of these rainy evenings that I realized something profound. Life had shifted, yes, but it had not ended. I still had love in my heart, memories that no one could take away, and strength that had carried me through decades of caregiving, grief, and sacrifice. I decided to channel my love differently. Instead of clinging to a home that no longer felt like mine, I would create a life of meaning where I was valued, not just tolerated. I began volunteering at a nearby community center, helping other elderly women who, like me, had given so much of themselves and felt forgotten. I found purpose in listening, in sharing stories, and in offering care to those who needed it. The first time I held another grandmother's hand and heard her story, I felt a spark of connection I hadn't realized I was missing. Here, my presence mattered. Here, my experience, my patience, and my love had a place. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to heal. Ayesha's visits became the highlight of my week. I cherished every laugh, every hug, every whispered secret. I began to write small stories for her, little tales of courage, love, and hope. She would sit beside me, listening intently, her eyes wide with wonder. And in those moments, I realized that love did not disappear. It simply took new forms, new shapes. Even if I could not be part of her daily life, I could still touch her heart, still leave an imprint that would last forever. One afternoon, as I was watering the flowers in my sister's garden, I received a call from Ahmed. "Amma," he said softly, "I wanted to check on you. How are you feeling?" His voice carried guilt, concern, and an unfamiliar distance. I could sense the struggle in his words, the battle between his loyalty to his family and the knowledge of what he had done. "I'm okay," I replied gently, settling in. "The days are quiet, but that's not always a bad thing." There was a pause on the other end. Then he said, "We miss you. Aisha misses you terribly." I swallowed, feeling tears prick my eyes. "I miss her too," I whispered. We were thinking," he continued, "maybe you could come for a longer visit. Spend a weekend with us. It's been too long." I felt a flutter of hope, tempered by caution. "I'll think about it," I said softly. Even as I spoke, I realized that this was not a full restoration of what I had lost. The house I had called home, the routines I had nurtured, the daily love I had given, those were gone. But the bridge I could build with my family, even if small, was a start. It reminded me that relationships are fluid. They can shift, change, and evolve even after hurt, even after distance. Over the following weeks, I continued to grow into my new life. I embraced my volunteer work with passion, nurtured relationships with friends, and explored hobbies I had long ignored. I began to write a memoir documenting my experiences as a mother, grandmother, and caretaker. My story became a testament to love, resilience, and the strength of the human spirit. I learned to set boundaries without guilt. I understood that caring for myself did not make me selfish. I realized that love does not always require constant presence. Sometimes, it thrives in memory, in shared moments, in the quiet understanding that hearts remain connected even when separated by circumstance. Ayesha's visits became more meaningful. We baked cookies together, painted pictures, read stories, and shared secrets. Each moment was a gift, and I cherished it fully, knowing that love was not measured by proximity, but by depth and sincerity. Ahmed and Shazia also began to find balance. They called more often, invited me for meals, and included me in small decisions about Ayesha's life. While the past could not be undone, small acts of recognition and appreciation helped heal the lingering wounds. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sunset, I realized how far I had come. The ache of abandonment was still there, a soft echo in my heart, but it no longer defined me. I had discovered a strength I did not know I possessed, a resilience born from decades of love, sacrifice, and the courage to continue despite being forgotten. I understood now that being left behind did not diminish my worth. My life, my love, my memories, they were mine, untouchable and eternal. I had survived loss, heartbreak, and neglect. I had survived being pushed aside by the people I loved, and in that survival, I had found a quiet power, a gentle freedom, and a renewed sense of purpose. Life continued, not as it had been, but as it could be. I had found peace in solitude, joy in connection with others, and fulfillment in personal growth. My relationship with my family evolved, shaped by boundaries, respect, and a deeper understanding of love. Aisha would often hold my hand and say, "Grandma, I love you." And I would smile, holding her close, feeling the truth of those words in the warmth of her tiny palms. I realized that love is not always constant. It shifts, it changes, it flows in unexpected directions. And while being left behind by those you love is a pain that cannot be erased, it is also an opportunity, a chance to discover who you are beyond the roles you have played, beyond the expectations of others, and beyond the comfort of familiarity. I had been promised care, love, and attention in my old age. Life had not given me exactly that, but it had given me something else, the chance to rediscover myself, to rebuild my sense of worth, and to create meaning on my own terms. And in the soft glow of evening, as I watched the horizon fade into twilight, I whispered a quiet promise to myself: I will continue to love. I will continue to live. I will continue to grow, because even when the world pushes you aside, even when the people you love move on, your heart remains, beating with courage, hope, and resilience. Time, I have learned, has a strange way of teaching you what truly matters. It can be slow, painful, and relentless, but it also brings clarity. Over the months following my move to my sister's home, I began to see life with sharper eyes, to understand the quiet lessons embedded in the heartbreak I had endured. At first, the days were empty. I woke, ate, and sat in silence, my heart echoing with memories of a home that was no longer mine. But gradually, I began to fill those hours with things that gave me joy, small, deliberate choices that reminded me I was still alive, still valuable, still capable of giving and receiving love. I started each morning with tea on the balcony, watching the sun rise over the distant hills. I watched the birds land on the railing, chirping softly, as if encouraging me to embrace the day. I began walking through the neighborhood, greeting strangers with a warm smile. Some smiled back, some nodded politely, but all interactions reminded me that I was still part of a wider world, not trapped in the shadow of neglect. Writing became my refuge. Each evening, I poured my thoughts onto paper, stories, memories, reflections, and letters to Rahim that would never be mailed. Sometimes I wrote about my childhood, my marriage, the birth of Amir, and the years spent raising him. Other times, I wrote about Aisha, her laughter, her curiosity, the way her small hand fit into mine. Writing helped me honor my past without being trapped by it. Aisha's visits remained a bright spot in my life. We would bake cookies, paint pictures, and read stories. Sometimes, when she fell asleep in my arms after a long afternoon, I would watch her chest rise and fall and feel an overwhelming sense of peace. These moments were fleeting, yet they reminded me that love transcends distance, schedules, and even misunderstandings. Ahmed began calling more often, checking in on me, asking advice, and sometimes just talking about his day. There were moments of awkwardness, guilt, and hesitation, but slowly, our relationship began to rebuild itself, not exactly as it had been, but in a form that respected both our spaces. Shazia, too, reached out more thoughtfully. She invited me to family dinners and celebrations, though the visits were shorter and more structured than they used to be. I accepted, understanding that relationships require compromise, patience, and the ability to let go of old expectations. Through all of this, I realized something profound. My worth was not defined by my role in someone else's household. I was not simply a mother or a grandmother, a caretaker, or a presence to be tolerated. I was Salma, an individual with decades of experience, love, and wisdom. And I had the right to claim my life, even if it looked different from the way I had imagined. Volunteering at the community center became a lifeline. I worked with other elderly women, some of whom had experienced neglect, loss, or abandonment. I listened to their stories, offered advice, and shared laughter and tears. In helping them, I found healing. Each small gesture, each kind word, reminded me that love and purpose are not limited to bloodlines. They extend to anyone willing to give or receive them. One day, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She said, "You remind me of my mother. I feel like you've saved my heart just by listening." I felt a warmth in my chest, a quiet triumph. After all the years of sacrifice, all the heartbreak, and all the moments of invisibility, I realized I had created meaning in the world, meaning that could not be erased by neglect or indifference. Looking back, I can see the lessons in my pain. Being left behind was one of the hardest experiences of my life. The feelings of rejection, invisibility, and grief were unbearable at times, but they also forced me to confront a truth I had long avoided. I had given so much of myself to others that I had forgotten the importance of giving to myself. I learned that love is not always returned in the way we expect. Sometimes, the people we pour our hearts into will disappoint us, will make choices we cannot understand, or will create distance we cannot bridge. And yet, that does not diminish the love itself. Love remains an act of courage, of generosity, and of hope. I also learned that boundaries are not betrayals, they are acts of self-preservation. I had believed that to be a good mother, grandmother, and wife, I needed to sacrifice endlessly. But life taught me that my well-being mattered just as much as the well-being of those I loved. Without tending to my own heart, I could not give fully to anyone else. Over time, I found a new rhythm with my family. I visited Ahmed and Aisha regularly, staying overnight, sometimes, and returning home when I needed rest. These visits were carefully balanced, neither intrusion nor absence, but they allowed me to maintain connection without losing myself. I noticed changes in Ahmed and Shazia as well. They began to show gratitude, not out of obligation, but from genuine recognition. They understood that my love did not depend on proximity, and that my presence in their lives was a choice, not a given. One evening, as I tucked Aisha into bed, she whispered, "Grandma, I love you so much." I held her close and replied softly, "I love you too, my little one, always." At that moment, I understood the enduring truth of love. It survives distance, misunderstanding, and even absence. It may change shape, but it never disappears entirely. Life is not always fair. Promises can be broken, hearts can be hurt, and those we love may not always honor us in the ways we hope. But the journey does not end there. We have the power to reclaim our lives, to redefine our worth, and to seek joy in unexpected places. I began traveling more, exploring the town where my sister lived, and sometimes venturing further. I attended workshops, met new friends, and discovered hobbies I had long postponed. Every experience reminded me that life is not defined solely by the family we have, it is also defined by the life we create for ourselves. I also continued writing. My memoir evolved into a collection of stories of love, resilience, and hope. I shared some of them with friends at the community center, and later, in small gatherings. Each story received warmth, empathy, and recognition. I realized that my life, in all its complexity and pain, had value. My experiences could touch hearts, inspire others, and perhaps even prevent someone from feeling as invisible as I once did. As I sit now in the quiet of my room, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. I have been promised care and then abandoned, left behind when I needed love the most. I have felt rejection, heartbreak, and invisibility. And yet, I have also found strength, resilience, and purpose. I have learned that love is not always perfect, and family is not always constant. But within the pain lies a lesson. Our worth is never defined by how others treat us, but by the depth of our hearts, the courage we carry, and the love we continue to give, even when it is not returned in full measure. I have discovered that the most important relationship we have is with ourselves. Caring for our own hearts, setting boundaries, and seeking fulfillment are not selfish, they are essential. From that place of self-respect and strength, we can love others more fully, without fear of being broken by their choices. Aisha still runs to me, her laughter filling the room. Ahmed and Shazia call more often, their voices tinged with gratitude and care. And I have found a life beyond the confines of their home, a life rich with connection, purpose, and love. I may have been left behind in my old age, but I am not lost. I am still here, alive, loving, and growing. And I will continue to live fully, to embrace each moment, and to honor the journey that brought me to this quiet, enduring strength. Because in the end, being left behind does not mean the end of life, or love, or hope. It simply opens the door to new beginnings, and to the realization that our hearts are far stronger than we ever imagined.